This is Hannibal here from the Hannibal TV on YouTube. Kevin Kelly, former WWE New Japan and AEW announcer. No, this is not him. He is on his way. But we have Casey Thompson, his podcast partner, joining us while we're waiting for Kevin. Casey is a former WCW wrestler and has been a mainstay in wrestling for a long time. And now he's doing a podcast with Kevin. So maybe to start this off, how did you two meet?
We met many years ago, back when the IWF, Eddie Mansfield ran the IWF. Kevin was one of the commentators. I was one of Blackjack Mulligan's boys. I rode with him everywhere. He was one of my mentors. And Blackjack was with Eddie, and Eddie was starting to do television out the original Universal Studios at Soundstage 23, and so Jack asked me to do TV for him, and they had a lot of big old guys, amazing bodies, some talent, some needed someone to really help them. My concern was that I was going to catch a lot of heat because I was doing TV for WCW, and I could hear the rumblings from Flair and different guys like that when we were up there. So I told Jack, I said, I don't want to get any heat on me, but if I can wear a hood, a mask, I said, no problem. I'll come out there and help you out, try to make you guys look good. So it's just that's where we met, and that was like 30 some years ago.
Eddie Mansfield, there's an interesting character, best known for his 2020 appearances, but he actually started the Universal Studios tapings where a lot of wrestlers who went on to be stars, such as I think the Smoking Guns, they were involved with that, weren't they?
Yep. Yeah, Kip and Mike. That's where that's where they started on TV, and then Jack got them a tryout through Blackjack Lanza, who was an agent with WWF at the time, and they ended up, signing the deal. You got two big old guys that's, 6'6" or something like that. So I mean, plus you got Blackjack behind them and Lanza. It was just a win-win, and they just took the ball, and Kip took the ball and just ran with it then.
Eddie seems like a bit of a temperamental individual in the brief interaction I've had with him. What was he like dealing with? Because he seems like one of those crazy wrestling characters, old school. Some would say Carney.
Are you talking Billy Gunn?
No, Eddie Mansfield.
Oh, Eddie Mansfield.
Yeah.
Yeah, Eddie. Wow. Kevin probably had more dealings direct than I did, but I remember Jack had a school. Eddie would come down there, and yeah, he was just straight from the territory days where they're all like gypsies and carnies and all that. That's exactly how he did stuff. He had a lot of heat from a lot of people. Kevin's mentioned before that he was his broadcast partner, and he didn't want anyone to know he was Eddie Mansfield. He was just a continental lover. So, I mean, if you're going to kayfabe your name like that, so it's, yeah, he was an interesting cat. He was a unique one of his own. Kevin was telling the story the other day that they went in there and pitched it with Mike Graham and Steve Kern to try to resonate for, I guess, the third time Florida Championship Wrestling. And Kern and Graham had, hey, Kevin, Kern and Graham, you can finish your story, Kevin. I was talking about how Eddie Mansfield snaked the Soundstage 23 from Universal.
Oh yeah, it was a great business meeting, and after they heard the pitch from Kern and Graham, Steve walks out, Mike walks out, and Eddie kind of lingers and says, "Hey, by the way, if you really want to do this, I could do it for a lot less money than what they're talking about." So yeah, then the meeting ended, and they called Eddie back and said, "What was this about? A lot less money?" So there you go. That's how it got done.
How did you get involved in wrestling, Kevin, with your background? Because you seem like one of the more normal people in wrestling.
Well, I'm not, again, we're all circus folk, and I always had that nomadic dream. Wanted to get into wrestling, didn't know how. And this is where Casey and I's road intersect before I even met Casey, because Casey's longtime tag partner, Cliff Anderson, happened to be promoting his own shows in Fort Pierce, Florida, and called the radio station that was nearby that I was working at and was looking for a ring announcer. And so I was there when the call came in, and I had wanted to get into wrestling and didn't know how, and ripped the phone out of the woman's hand, talked to Cliff, and, met with him and got the job. So it was really kind of that easy. It fell into my lap. It was fortuitous. But again, that was how Casey and I first knew each other without knowing each other.
Very interesting. And what was your journey like to WWE? Did you have to spend much time before you actually made it to the big time?
Well, I started with Cliff in the spring of 91, and then did the IWF for a couple of years, and then was doing shows on the local indie scene. And then by like 94, 95, my wife and I are trying to have a baby, and I'm thinking about being done. And then the guy who ran the hotel that all the WCW wrestlers stayed at when they came to MGM and Universal to do the tapings, Herb Hennessy, he got me an audition at WCW to warm up the crowd. And at the same time, I had asked Billy Gunn about, maybe ring announcing on a loop of Florida house shows for the WWF. And when he asked Bruce Pritchard about it, Bruce said, "Oh, that Kevin Kelly, we've actually been looking for him. We want to bring him up for an audition because Vince wants to get away from the microphone." So in the span of like where I was kind of like 1 foot out of the business after 4 or 5 years in, then within the span of about 6 weeks, I had opportunities with both big companies and wound up, succeeding in the WWF audition and getting the job there.
I heard Casey Thompson on another interview with you guys talking about some of the bullying that went on backstage in WCW with like the Steiners taping up some of the Mexicans. Do you guys have any stories from back in that day where the bullying occurred, but it was kind of accepted, whereas now something like that would never be allowed and would be a big deal where people would get fired?
Casey, you saw a lot more of it.
The Steiners, they did what they wanted to do. They would. I don't know if I'd call it bullying. I'll just call it ribs. I guess people would call it bullying now, but we that have been around forever just call it a rib. They tie up one of the Mexicans and put him in a chair and roll him around everywhere. Or they always brought their pit bull with them, Arnold. And Bobby Eaton, one of the nicest guys ever in the wrestling business, had the weakest stomach. If you did, he would just throw up. And so the Steiner's dog would come there and they would go to cater and get a plate of food with a bunch of chicken breasts for Arnold. Arnold would eat it and he'd start throwing up. And then Bobby would like look at it and say, "Oh, Scott, get your dog." Bobby would start throwing up. And then Arnold would eat Bobby's throw up, and then Bobby start throwing up again, running through, so it was just always something like that. I was in we were going to the airport. It was, Rick was driving, Bagwell was in the front, I was in the back with Scott. And this car was going slow, going through the toll plaza. And Rick is like, he doesn't know who he's messing with. This is a rent-a-car. It's completely just smashed into the back of him and rear-ended him. And they're like, and the guy's like in a little Fiat, convertible, little car like that. And, they're like, this guy's like, these guys looked at us like these guys are actually crazy. And they got up next to him, and Scott had like a big old giant, super big gulp and hit him in the head with it. The soda, exploded everywhere all over the dude's head. And this guy's going about 90 miles an hour, just cuts through the median and goes the other way and just like keeps on going. It was just the way they lived their life, they,
we always said that the best wrestlers are extensions of their natural personalities. And we see that, today everybody is a lot more cautious, conscientious, but in those days and before, it's a wild, wild west. The Undertaker recently was talking about, guys back in the old days had to have either a gun or a knife with them in their bag because the ribs would get so bad that you would have to basically threaten somebody. So it was, kind of what was an accepted practice back in those days has gone by the wayside for the most part. And ribs are always something that are that are fun and can lighten up a locker room. But then, of course, there are ribs that go too bad. By the way, Bobby Eaton, you could also make him throw up by simply putting your hand over his mouth. Regal taught me that one. Kevin, put your hand over Bobby Eaton's mouth. Why? Well, just watch. And Bobby, come here. You got something. And I put my hand. Hey, what are you doing?
Bobby was the nicest guy you've ever met. He, in his bag, he had everything. He had like a gallon Ziploc bag full of quarters, because back in those days you needed change for the vending machines. Bobby had it. You know, you needed a sew kit. Bobby had. I was at a TV once, and I was watching Bobby with his boots spray painting them before the TV taping, and I'm like, what? And then looked on TV when he looked through the monitor. His boots look brand new. You know, he's just Bobby had everything.
I know you've talked about it a few times, Kevin, but I know all the fans are going to want to know if you could kind of explain what happened with you and AEW and the big news story that's going around now with, I guess there's an ongoing lawsuit, which you probably can't talk about much. But for people that aren't aware of it, what happened there?
It was, a really just unfortunate set of circumstances. You learn lessons in life, and you learn that people that you think are your friends aren't really your friends. And that was the case. That's what I found out with Ian Riccaboni. I thought Ian and I were friends. We were in like group chats talking about baseball and goofing on each other, and there were others in there as well. And we always would laugh and joke, and come to find out that, I was home from New Japan for a couple of weeks right after the G1, and I had kind of that time scheduled off. I still had Japan obligations, and just go on Discord like I always do and just want to see what the fans are saying about New Japan. And there I see Ian like hammering me. And just like it broke my heart to a certain extent. And that kind of led to my mental state really being hurt. And as the time went along, and I don't know if that affected my performance, even though I always asked about my performance and I was told I was doing great, I kind of saw like, my role sort of diminishing. And it could have just been my imagination, but again, I wasn't necessarily in the right mind. So now we kind of fast forward to March, and I was really getting, my wife and I had split up. We were having problems. I was very depressed, and I was very angry, confused, and I didn't know what was going to happen in my life. Then I started to reach out for help in April. And while I was reaching out for help, because I had gone on social media and written a bunch of crazy stuff, but I wasn't in my right mind. And I've told the staff psychiatrist that, and we're talking all weekend long and talking about, medications and treatments. And I'm going to go see him the following Thursday. And then on Wednesday, they fired me for bad mouthing the company online. So I was like, you guys didn't, I talked to HR through this whole process when this thing with Ian first started. And I was like, hey, is this something I could report? And is this something that you guys could help me with? And they were like, oh yeah, sure. And they never really did anything or didn't tell me what they did. So I never was able to get beyond any of it. And I was never given any reassurance that everything was okay, at least in regards to that. And it always bothered me that, the guy that I thought was my friend did this to me. And I just lost my mind. So that happened in April. In the first week of May, I went into a hospital, and I spent a week, because of my mental issues, and, got with doctors, got new medication, feel a lot better. And looking back on it, it's like, yeah, I got kind of shafted here. So that's why we're, pushing this issue. And maybe if I wasn't listed as an independent contractor, maybe I'm sure it would have been a different story, because it would have had protections under the Americans with Disabilities Act. I would have had protections all over the place that, I didn't have as an independent contractor. So that's the reason why we're taking this action, and we'll see where it goes. It's anything legal, it takes a long time, and it's an arduous process. But, whether it works out to my favor or not, I'm glad I did this, and I want to start talking more about mental health, and especially with men, and especially with, where people are afraid to say something and afraid to ask for help. You got to make sure you get help, whether it's given to you or not. You got to find steps to get your mental health right, because then all of these different things are going to happen. Would I have been constantly questioning my role? Would I have been worried sick every single day to where it was affecting my marriage of over 30 years? All of these different things in the wrestling business that we all know, the three of us know firsthand, and we've experienced them multiple times. This was just my breaking point. And, I'm thankful for the time that I spent in the hospital and, for the first week of May, because it really provided me with a lot of clarity about what I need to do, how I need to take care of myself, and where I need to be going forward.
And you mentioned it was affecting your role. What exactly was your job or jobs in AEW?
Well, I just had one, and it was just announcing on Collision, and came in at the start of that show. That's what I was hired for, to be the play-by-play guy, and wanted to. But I told Tony Khan, I want to be the main guy, and his main guy was Excalibur, and I was like, well, okay. Let me work towards that as a goal. And he shifted Tony Schiavone back onto commentary once Punk was gone. And I think maybe that might have had something to do with it too. I think Punk didn't want to have anything to do with, that crew, and wanted to have his own people on that show, which was great. And it was, working with Nigel again was a ton of fun. So we always had a great time, and working with Schiavone was awesome. What a great guy. Love him. And, when I left the company, I only got a few messages. I heard from Nigel. I heard from Tony Schiavone. I heard from the Spanish announcers, because we all worked together very closely. And, that was pretty much it. A couple of people here and there, but by and large, that was it. It was just the announcer crew that we sort of stuck together. So yeah, that was just it. It was play-by-play, and then it shifted over to the third chair, and I felt like our rotation and our rhythm on Collision was very good. And we told all the stories, and we had high energy and a lot of fun. So yeah, it changed a little bit, but really didn't. I wasn't asked to do anything else. They didn't have me do any producing or anything to do with talent. All those positions were sewn up. I never asked about them. They have really good people in charge, and that was just it.
You mentioned they have really good people in charge. It seems like they have a lot of excess fat as far as talent, in my opinion, that they're paying a lot of money to. And some of them are insulting the company publicly and still having these large contracts. So it's interesting to me to hear that you kind of got shafted with a mental health issue when like some of these people don't even have mental health issues and are making public comments worse than what you did.
Well, we don't know. We don't know what their issue is. So like most recently, when you talk about Ray Phoenix was the most recent one who has gone out publicly and spoken negatively about the company. And then there's been some backtracking on that. And we know that Ray has had a history of injuries. We know that his relationship with his brother, of course, and not being allowed to end his contract. Who's to say what his mental state is? And maybe that did play a role. I would want to have that conversation. I would want him to have a conversation with mental health professionals, just to be able to, hey, in case there is, let's have that conversation and let's find out what's going on. And again, if Tony wants to collect wrestlers and have them, so that he can pick and choose who he wants to put in his various matches, that's up to him. Nobody ever signs an AEW contract with a gun to their head, and they're not held hostage. They may not be used in the role that they want. They may not be as prominently featured as they had hoped, but it is what it is, and you understand that. So you're kind of giving away some of your freedom and some of your ability to make your own deals and call your own shots when you do sign up with them, with no guarantee that you're going to be used on a frequent basis. You can't say, put me in, coach. And which is kind of what I did. I was like, I came here to be the number one. I didn't come here to sit the bench. And, sometimes when that happens, you don't get what you want. So you just move on and keep doing the best that you can. And I think that's really it with a lot of the wrestlers, is they've got to be just patient and just know that they're making good money for the most part, and that they don't need to go out there and kill themselves to get the attention of somebody who has the ability to go, okay, now I've used him, now I'm going to want to use him. I've used her, now I want to use her. That's always, and you guys know this better than I would. It can be mentally taxing to be on the sidelines and sit there and watch things and go, wow, I wish I had that opportunity.
Yeah, and both of you guys could probably answer this. It seems you mentioned about some of the crazy risks that some of these wrestlers take in AEW, and kind of that high spot and crazy flip atmosphere of the company. Do you think fans are almost, because we see ratings and attendance going down all the time with that company and public interest, do you think fans are kind of getting tired of seeing that now as we're going into, I think, the 6th year?
I think fans still like to believe that, some part of it might be real. So they want the believability factor that comes along with compelling stories. I was always taught, when you're telling a match, it's like riding a roller coaster. There's ups and downs. So you have your stuff, your comeback, your cutoff, your false finishes, your false comebacks, all that stuff, and you're building for that big going up that roller coaster. Then it comes down when you take it home, and it just goes crazy. And I think when you go and you have your first match and they do 100 high spots and do 20 finish moves and kick out of all of them, where are you to go from there? I mean, generally speaking, back in the day, the first match would be, you have 5-6 minutes and they say, don't go out of the ring, keep it in the ring, because you're building up for the main event. Now it's like, you know, I think a part of it has to do with what Kevin was saying. They're all striving to get more and more TV time, so they're going out there and they're doing everything they can to try to get, I guess, Tony Khan's eye to, you know, keep on bringing them back and keep on giving them more airtime. So they're doing all these daredevil moves, and how much of the roster is injured or been injured?
Right. That's kind of where I am, and I look at the roster as, look at the guys that are on the shelf, and look at, the number of top names that are not on the programs on a weekly basis. Not, take away CM Punk, but let's look at Adam Copeland and his injury and what that did. I don't know what the long-term plan was for he and Christian, but that obviously shelved all of that. And when you look at Eddie Kingston, who's so much of the company was built around him in 23, and his knee finally goes, that's a big loss. And Kenny Omega, and the wear and tear over the years, and the number of injuries that he kind of was working through, that just sort of all built up to where now, it was, the back, and now it's, diverticulitis, which you wouldn't wish on anybody. But the number of main event guys that they have not been able to utilize that could draw a rating. And then you look at, okay, well, it's not just them, but who on the bench have they elevated to where now John Moxley has that right opponent, or Christian has that right opponent? All of those things take their toll. So it's not necessarily a plug and play thing. Like in football, you could take somebody off the bench and they can go play the same position. And if they follow the assignments, they can have success in that play and achieve the goal of that play. It takes time. It takes time to build new stars and to do these different things. So you're not talking about something that has taken 6 years to sort of wane away. It's time, and you're going to get back some of that audience, and you've got to capture the hearts and minds through storytelling and through, long-term investment in characters. But when you don't have the characters that you've invested long-term in over the past 5-6 years, that's going to affect things.
And Kevin, you might be able to answer this. One of the things that's also affecting them, that's actually been in the news for about 6 or 7 months now, there seems to be a disconnect with who they put on the posters at events to who actually shows up. I think at one point there was like 9 people on an Allentown poster and only or 7 of them weren't actually there. And it happens almost on a weekly basis. I know it's card subject to change, but for instance, they had 10 shows in Canada this year. Moxley was on the posters for all of them, and he didn't appear on any of them. Do you know where the disconnect might be in something like that? And do you think it's being done on purpose, or is Tony Khan just so busy he's not paying attention to little details like that?
I can tell you it's not being done on purpose. I saw this firsthand when I was in the WWF, that things were siloed. So there was creative services over here that was creating the posters. And again, because of press runs and the length of time that it takes to get these things done, you have ideas of where the company is creatively when you're creating it. Then it goes to print, then it takes time and the approvals, and then, okay, it finally comes out. And by then, because of injuries, because of different creative directions, a lot of things have changed. When I was in the WWF, and it was actually Vince Russo who started this, one of the things he never gets credit for is he bridged the gap between creative services and creative. And we would have weekly meetings or monthly meetings at least. And I had to hold a couple of them for him when he was busy doing something else. But it was, okay, here's where we are and here's where we're going, more importantly. And not telling them the finishes of matches coming up this Monday on Raw, because we didn't know that. But you can look for this wrestler to be featured in a more prominent spot over the next 3 months. And nothing has really changed with the top guys. We could always say Vince's top 4, and depending on where they were, Vince's top 4 would be Stone Cold, The Rock, The Undertaker, and whomever. Bret Hart, Shawn Michaels, The Undertaker, and Yokozuna, whatever those top 4 were. So that helped so that we got, things like that. Now, and I'll give you another, for example, with WWF. So when Canada was doing great business with WWF, they had, what was his name? Carl ran the WWF office.
Carl DeMarco.
He was fervent in knowing what was going on and knowing, hey, listen, you've got these guys on the poster. They need to be on these cards. And, that push and that drive. And again, that helped his Canadian office be able to sell a lot of sponsorships and generate a lot of revenue for the company. So it does work. But there aren't those people in place in AEW. So it's not a we don't care. It's there's only so many people and only so many hours in the day. And those are the growing pains.
Do you think they also could be just making a master poster and just adding the details in and have all the pictures of their stars on it, and just like this city changed when, where, and what?
That's what it would always be. So we would look at, in WWF, who were the guys that were prominently featured on the most recent televisions, and it takes time to create those designs and get the designs approved. And again, those would go through. They wouldn't just pass, the artist finishes it. Oh, look, I'm done. Submit. No, they had to get approved, and would get approved by Vince a lot of times. He would have to see it. And more than once, we would put stuff in the magazine, and then Vince would look at the magazine and be like, what the fuck is this? And I'm like, wait a minute, we talked about this. Or, let Vince Russo have that fight. No, we talked about this. One time, he was so mad that something was in the magazine that he had approved, that he had signed off on, but it was a different direction. He wanted to pull the entire press run. How much would it cost to get all these magazines off the street? Okay, we'll get you a price. Well, Vince, it's going to be $500,000. Ah, damn it. But that's the way it is. That happens when you're talking about, the lag time between creative processing and press runs and that type of stuff. So yeah, it does happen. I don't think it's it's no malicious, but again, it leads itself to finger pointing, and you could say, well, it's a sloppy shop. But if all the seats are full, nobody's going to bother. Wow, look, the product is so good and it's so hot. 7 of the 9 guys on the posters weren't even on the shows, but look, all the seats are full. So people can point fingers at those types of things when empty seats happen. A lot of finger pointing when business goes down.
Oh yeah.
One thing I've wanted to ask you for a while, Kevin. Jason Sensation is a guy that's had his mental issues. Sadly, I don't know where he is now, but it hasn't been good for him lately. I'm sure he had those back when he was with WWE. He was saying numerous times about issues he had with you back when you were
Right.
working in the WWE office. Could you tell us your side of that?
I never, every time, when because there were a lot of times he would reach out to me and I would be like, I'm not saying it didn't happen. I just don't remember of it. Can you tell me when? Can you tell me what? He was accusing me basically of bullying him. And I just, I just don't remember. And it, and it, I, I always got along well with him. I thought we were, friendly. Um, and I know that he did have, some issues or whatever, but I never said anything against him or, went out of my way to try to get him in trouble or, I know there just weren't plans for him and they tried him as a wrestler. He was somebody, again, that they always liked and appreciated his talents. But in terms of, okay, if you're not doing impressions of wrestlers, then what? Well, so he tried announcing, he tried wrestling, managing, things like that, and it just wasn't the right fit. So yeah, it can take a heavy toll, and I just wish him the best.
Yeah, because I know there's been some serious stuff in recent years, so I wish him the best too. What exactly was your role with development in those days? Because I believe it was the Memphis territory at that point.
Yeah, I was, my job title, talent development manager, and it was just kind of like helping to oversee the talent development groups. And when they always had OVW, and that was pretty self-contained. They did a very good job of managing themselves and the wrestlers, and we would hear from a wrestler every once in a while if his paycheck didn't arrive in the mail or something like that, or hey, there's a discrepancy on this reimbursement. But by and large, it was pretty much like smooth sailing. But Memphis was new. Memphis had come from where did they had guys like in LA and Puerto Rico, I think, and then they kind of consolidated it to Louisville and Memphis. And Jerry Lawler was instrumental behind getting that done. Logistically made sense between Memphis and Louisville because you could drive guys back and forth. So they needed more help. So I was more hands-on with them and helped out with announcing and helped out with, just getting people there, making sure that they had what they needed. And they ran an aggressive live event schedule too. They were running up to 20 events a month. So those guys were working hard.
This might be a question for both of you. As far as the independent scene and actual live events for inexperienced wrestlers to get experience these days, it seems like NXT is running much less live events than ever. WWE's all but cut out house shows. AEW, it seems like AEW has really affected the independent scene. It seems like quite a few of them have gone out of business or stopped running shows recently. Do you think the future's looking good? I know they got the WWID program, but as far as organic independent wrestlers gaining experience.
What do you think, Casey?
I think as when business is up, when all the wrestling's they're changing everything to a television format. They're not worried about they're losing money on their house shows and stuff like that. So they're cutting all that out. But when the TV ratings are up, that means generally speaking, the independent wrestling is up. So I mean, the better ratings they get, the more it's going to create for more people at the indie shows. So I think it's good overall, but it's just one of those things. But when it comes to that, when you're first starting, it doesn't matter if you're wrestling in front of 5 people or 5,000 people. You want to get that ring time in front of people. Um, I remember I had a conversation with The Rock once. We were talking once in the dressing room. We were talking about the weirdest places we've ever wrestled at. And he's like, yeah, I wrestled in a barn on all the people were sitting on bales of hay. He said, "What about you?" I said, I was wrestling in a drive-in movie theater during the rain, and everyone's sitting in their car, and whenever they liked something, they would blow the horn." And he's like, "Oh, wow." He said, "You got me beat there." But the point I'm making is, if you have 20 or 50 people and you can get them to hate you as a heel, imagine how easy it's going to be in front of 10,000 or 20,000 people. Same thing as a baby face. If you're going out there and you're getting them to get behind you and all that, it just makes it easier. So it doesn't matter, the number that's in the crowd. And of course, it's always nice, and it seems to be easier to take a bump when there's a packed house, and then when there's only like a handful of people. Every bump hurts a lot worse when there's no one there. When there's a ton of people, you don't feel anything. But it's all about, at that level, it's about gaining the experience, learning how to work a crowd, and it just makes it easier when you move up the ladder, in my opinion.
And promoting has never changed. You still have to promote. And I think a lot of
Yeah.
independent promoters nowadays struggle to find ways to promote. I work with a lot of, well, not a lot, but I work with a handful of promotions here in, in the U.S. And we go back to, it's blocking and tackling. It's the fundamentals and the foundations. And you've got to go out and tell the people in the local town that you're there, that you're running this event. And if a local business owner who happens to be a wrestling promoter walks up and down the streets of his town and says, "Hey, have you ever heard of me?" Probably 90 to 95% of the people that you'll run across have never heard of you, your promotion, or the fact that you're running a show this Saturday. So you have to realize that, yes, people are understanding WWE and they see Cody Rhodes and the Bloodline and they watch the show and they like that. And they've heard of AEW, and that's kind of a wild show. What are you about? Well, what's the identity? A lot of independent promotions try to be WWE light. They try to do their own form of sports entertainment with no budget and with lesser talent. So why would people pay money to come and sit in an uncomfortable chair, in a gym or in a, rec center, an hour away from home, to watch a poor version of what they could watch for free 5 nights a week? That's the question that every independent promoter has to ask himself. How do I differentiate myself while still capitalizing on the popularity of wrestling? And it goes back to the fundamentals of promotion, in my opinion.
Good advice. And you mentioned about the whole CM Punk saga in AEW, and I guess he was one of the people, I guess, that you had a good relationship with. Could you tell us from your perspective, I guess maybe overall, what the AEW backstage was like, but particularly that time when it seems like it was at its all-time worst?
Yeah, I came in after all of the disagreement, hullabaloo fight with the Bucks and Kenny and those guys and Punk. So I wasn't there, wasn't even there. And then when I started with Collision, I know that Punk was kind of looking at this as a cathartic way to come back and to put all of that behind him. But I was unaware that, of the depth of the issues. And then, of course, wasn't there in London when it all burst, and that was the end. So it was surprising to me, but I think that people had taken sides, and there were Punk's guys and there were not Punk's guys, and those are the guys that you weren't seeing on Saturdays, and conversely, you weren't seeing Punk's guys on Wednesdays, which wasn't the worst thing in the world, because again, if you get one roster of guys on a Wednesday and then Saturday it's an entirely different roster, that's kind of a good thing. Punk leaves, and then the brand split, if you will, which it was never described as that, but became, the roster became more homogenized between the two shows. So yeah, it was, and when we were told that Punk got fired, it wasn't a good situation, and everybody, some people were like, that sucks. Some people were like, well, it is what it is. And probably a few people that I never spoke to, but probably a few people were like, yeah, good, he got what he deserved. Everybody has an opinion, but the vast majority of people, 85 to 90%, I would say, just said, what a terrible situation, wish it never happened, and let's just move on.
It ended up being very good for CM Punk, and I guess very bad for Tony Khan in the end.
Well, you look at the way his career has continued and versus the way AEW business might have trailed off. If there is a one-to-one relationship, you can certainly make that argument. I know that Punk was very hands-on with the Saturday show, and to what Casey was saying, let's make the special. Let's make the big, and let's only have to do one because it sucks. And the reason that Casey is sitting on the couch, and the reason why a lot of wrestlers, his age, have health issues and broken this and affected that, is because anytime you do anything in wrestling, it hurts and it sucks. So let's minimize falling down. Let's do as much walk and talk as we can, and let's try to engage the people without having to risk our bodies. And risking your body is not jumping off of something high. Risking your body can be climbing through the ropes. Risking your body can be just taking a basic flat back bump, even though there is no such thing. So that was always one of the things, like, I've been, stressing in my time, hey, don't fall down. Just stay on your feet as much as possible, because you're much less likely to get hurt if you're standing on your feet.
And you'll probably stand out more these days if you do that now as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
This is a question, I guess, for both of you guys regarding Vader. I'm sure you've both had dealings with him. I had one of his last interviews. I heard you, Casey, say in a recent interview that you were there for the infamous fight. Is it true that Ming ultimately stopped the fight, like Vader said, and it probably would have continued on? Maybe Vader would have got the upper hand, or was it pretty much over by the time Ming got there? And just also Kevin's recollections of Vader too.
I'll go first. I loved him. I thought he was a nice guy. His gloves were very smelly.
Kevin.
No,
Kevin,
I thought he was a nice guy.
Yes, because you didn't have to wrestle with him in the ring.
I didn't have to, but his gloves were smelly, and I will admit that. And he had lifts in his boots. He had multiple lifts in his boots. It was like this because he was trying to look tall. I don't think it affected anything. But now, Casey, you can continue.
I'll put it this way. 2 weeks prior to that, we were wrestling. It was MGM Studios, and the word was going around Hogan's wrestling in Enhancement Talent. And so the buzz was going around everywhere. So I was like, okay. Well, me thinking, I'm like, okay, Pee Wee Anderson was Hogan's personal referee in all of his matches. So I went to Pee Wee and I said, hey, man, is it true? He's like, yeah. I said, oh, that's cool. I said, I'll get my payday for that. He said, really? I said, yeah, absolutely. He's like, all right. He said, you for real? I said, I swear to God. He said, all right, done. He said, it'll be you. The next day we come in, it said Hulk Hogan versus Casey Thompson. And everyone was like, whoa, how'd you do that? And I was just playing back, just playing dumb. I don't know. And then, of course, how everything changes at the last minute. It went to Hogan and Savage against Orndorff and Paul Roma. Pretty wonderful. So I had the day off. I'm like, all right, well, I had the day off. I'm still getting paid, so I'm trying to creep out of there. And as I'm going, I think I get caught by one of the agents, Terry Taylor or someone like that. He said, hey, where you going? I said, oh, well, nowhere. Why? And he's like, oh, we got you a match. I'm like, oh, okay. Who you got? He's like, oh, we got you against Vader. I'm like, oh, damn. So I went from having to wrestle Hogan to having off to wrestling Vader for like the 1,000th time. So I'm like, all right, 3 minutes. So we get in there, and he has me in the corner. He's throwing those big haymakers where he's throwing live rounds at you. So I'm blocking up. I'm just up like this. I'm just blocking everything. And we get into the back. And at this point, I got to the point where if something happened, I would want to know, well, hey, what happened? What went wrong? What can I do to do better or fix it? Or what did you do or whatever? And so we got into the back, and there was two guys in the back. It was by like the gorilla position. Dave Penzer was there, and a guy from another enhancement guy, Nasty Ned Brady. He was in there. And he's like, "Hey, what happened? Why weren't you selling my punches?" I was like, "What do you mean selling your punches? You're throwing live rounds at me." And he's like, "Well, why didn't you go down?" Or I'm like, "Go down?" I said, "You want me to go down on my ass where you can knee me in the face and break my nose?" I said, I said, "You're just a piece of shit, bro." I said, "Why don't you learn how to work? Learn how to throw a punch. You're going there killing everyone." And he was like, and I was like, and everyone was like, "Whoa, he's about to get his ass kicked." And I was ready to just like haul ass out of there. And he's like, "Hey, I just put you over with Flair." I'm like, and I was so hot because I wrestled him so much, my head felt like it was a balloon from all those punches he was hitting me in the head with. And I just said, you just need to learn how to work. I said, this is a business, You're not supposed to be taking liberties on people out there. And he says, "Well, I put you over with Flair." And I'm like, "I don't need you to put me over to anyone." I said, "Just learn how to work." And he just put his head down and walked away. And the other two guys were like, "Whoa." And fast forward 2 weeks is when he, you know, messed with Orndorff. And I was in the other dressing room, so I didn't see the whole thing. But you could hear it all. And yeah, Orndorff wasn't a guy to mess with. You know, he he was just a badass all the way around. But yeah, how Ku stepped in, and I mean, that's another badass you don't want to mess with either. So I was there. I was what is it in the same dressing room, and but smarted off the Paul, and Paul gave it to him.
Paul just wanted him to do his pre-tapes, and he'd asked him a couple of times, right, Casey?
Yeah, yeah. Asked him like 3 or 4 times, and he just tried to smart off and big shot him, and Paul wasn't having it no more.
And Paul was dressed out. He was in his wrestling gear, or he was in how was he dressed?
No, Paul was he was in his flip flops. Paul was in wore flip flops everywhere. He was like he wore the Florida stuff all the time. In a shirt with flip flops on. Everywhere.
And both of his arms were working great, right? Like he didn't have atrophy in the one arm because of
No,
nerve
he
damage.
did already.
Oh, so wait a minute. Paul Orndorff beats up Vader with one arm wearing flip flops.
Pretty much.
I tell you this, it killed Vader's mystique when he came into WWF, because that was like that's all anybody knew. And the big mastodon. Yeah, killed his push, killed everything. And the fact that Paul Orndorff with one arm and in flip-flops whipped his ass in a WCW locker room. Just nobody was intimidated by Vader at that point.
And it destroyed him mentally too. For the time I spent around him, you could tell this is something that never left his mind.
Yeah. It's when you build yourself up and you build your aura and your mystique as it had been since Japan, from his first match in New Japan where he goes over and is smashes Inoki and there's a riot in the building, and from there his great run to where he's taken a lot of damage and physically he's older and he's not the same anymore, but he's still Vader. He's still, the mastodon. And that wasn't happening anymore. Paul Orndorff said, "Get up. Let's do your pre-tapes." Well, I'm going to come back and ask again. You better be ready to go. And he wasn't. So it was on.
Man, I don't know many people that liked him ever.
He was really nice to me, but I never wrestled him, as I said. And he seemed very lonely at the end.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely can see that. In WCW, his attitude was probably different once everything happened and he went up to WWF. Plus, it was a different league up there. I mean, the work rate was probably better, and he wasn't to that standard even.
Right, and that was, so he came in '95, and they kind of smashed him over. But then by summer of '96, nobody wanted to work with him anymore. And the SummerSlam match with Shawn Michaels, which has been talked about so much, and Shawn wasn't interested in doing business with Vader either. So yeah, it just kind of it affects everything, and obviously it affected him mentally, and then he was out of the company probably maybe a year and a half later, a couple of years. But was always nice enough and got along with everybody in the locker room area as far as the production people. And there were times that people, especially in the early 90s, Sid was a guy who had a terrible rep. And when he was announced as coming back in the summer of 96, I taught, photographers and all the people who were like, oh God, not this guy again. He's so miserable to work with. He's awful. You can't get anything done. And when he came back in 96, he was like a different dude. And everybody was like, oh my God, what a difference. That's so great.
See, I like Sid. Sid
Yeah.
was great to me, personally.
And he was great in, to some people and wasn't great to others. It just depended on where you were and your point of view. Sid was known as being hard to deal with when he was there in 92. But when he came back in 96, he was like a different guy.
I worked him in 92 in Daytona Beach at the Ocean Center. I walked in, and I think we discussed this on one of our episodes before. I walked in, and I was already working the Mountie, so, it's a night off, right? Working him. You don't feel anything. Then Sid seen me, he's like, oh my God, you're here tonight? I'm like, yeah. He's like, oh, I want to wrestle you. I'm like, no. I wrestled Sid so many times in WCW. And he's like, so he took me to Rene Goulet. He's like, hey, I want to wrestle Casey. He's like, no, we already made the matches. We're not switching them, Sid. So he takes me to Tony Gurria, and then he goes to the next agent, goes up to Pat Patterson. Pat says no. He takes me to Vince by the hand. He's pulling me he's like, I want to work him. I've worked him in Atlanta. He can do all my stuff. No one else can do my stuff. And Vince was like, all right, Sid, if that's what you want, no problem. So you can go back and look, and it's one of those things that never happened. At the beginning of the card, I worked the Mountie, and at the end of the card, on the same TV taping, I was literally on the hour show twice. I wrestled Sid. They didn't bother to edit it out or anything, because I could do his whirly bird. I could do all his stuff and everything. So I mean, he was great to me. And then I worked him again in WWF as me and RVD. He wrestled as Matt Burns, was the name. We wrestled him. And
I've seen that match. That's a good match. That's a really good match.
And he power bombs both of us on the gurney. And afterwards, he's like, guys, he says, I was here, but now because of you guys, I'm up here. He says, I really appreciate it. And he gave us maybe $50 each. He says, I know it's not a lot of money, but just help you get down the road, buy dinner, have some drinks on me tonight. I just want to show my appreciation to you guys. So that's something they did back in the old days.
Yep.
You don't hear about that anymore. People don't do that stuff. So, it was cool. And I see Rob has been posting it a lot now and, talking more about it. He kept quiet about it. It was him for years and years and years. But now I see that he's mentioned it and everything.
And that's one of the reasons why we started the podcast that we did, because there seems to be a raised interest in who is the guy who's making the star. Who are the enhancement guys and what's their story and where did they come from and whatever happened to them. So that's one of the, that's what got Casey and I talking, was because we're talking about all of Casey's experiences and all the great matches that he had with all the big stars. And, with so much of the content being on YouTube, it's easily accessible. Like the one fan said, it's on RVD's YouTube channel. Now it's like everybody is proud of those. Whereas, you used to wrestle under assumed names, aliases, wear hoods, do anything you could to protect, no, that's not me. What are you talking about? That's Joe Beavens. He looks like you. No, it's somebody else. Now it's like, oh yeah, that was me. And I did that. And the fans are like, oh, that's so cool. So that's one of the reasons why we started the Wrestling podcast, because we wanted to start to tell that story.
Absolutely. I used to feel that way about doing jobs and stuff. And then I was real good friends with the Armstrongs. And Steve used to run shows up in Alabama. And he would book me all the time. And so I'd go up there and he's like, he's like, hey, you're on TV every week. He says, it doesn't matter if you're winning or losing or if you're doing a job or not. He says, the fact is, you're on worldwide TV every single week. So he says, you're a star to those people. He's like, so, which was cool because I got to wrestle the Bullet. I wrestled the whole thing. I wrestled all the brothers and the dad.
Wow.
So there's a very small group of people I think that might have done that. I had the honor doing that, and the Bull was like, "Hey," when I met him at the hotel, they're all smoking the smiz, and he's like, "I've heard a lot about you." He's like, "Just don't hurt me tonight." I said, "Nah." I said, "What do you want to do?" And I was like, let's just start off slow and taper down from there. He's like, "All right, sounds like a plan to me." And I got there. The ring was the highest ring off the ground I've ever seen in my life. It's literally like the platform of the ring was like 5 foot off the ground, and I'm looking at it thinking, all right, I'm gonna have a hard time getting into this ring. How is this? And he must have been in his late 60s then. I said, how is he gonna get in there? Sure enough, he was in there. We had a nice little easy match and everything. But it, first it was an honor to wrestle a legend like that, but just to, it changed the Armstrongs changed my perception on it. Embrace it, don't hide it.
So where can people follow your podcast if they want to start listening to these stories? Because you guys have some great stories.
So we put it on YouTube, and we share it on Facebook, and we're again, listen, Casey got hit in the head a lot. Both of us are in our 50s, and we're technologically challenged. We're trying to figure out how to get this daggone thing on like Spotify and the podcast networks. Hannibal, you got a whole big network here. You got this huge audience, 400,000 viewers. It's like, how do we get that? We need some smart people around us to help us get this podcast in more places. But basically, anywhere you go, if you type in In-Ring Wrestling Podcast, just Google it, and it'll bring you to the page. It'll show you the shorts, the episodes 4 and all right now are on YouTube, and we're just starting to scratch the surface. We've got content for years.
Yeah, TikTok everywhere. But a little story behind the name. If anyone's done TV, we like to tell a lot of stuff that happens behind the scenes that everyone wants to know about. So the way the name came about, when you looked at the wrestling TV format, it'd have the numbers for everything is time coded, and then it would have the say edge verse slash in ring, and then it had so they just write your name in. So that's where it came from. The enhancement guy was always in ring, so basically no music and entrance. He walked out with the referee. He walked out when the other guy was coming back, to keep the flow going. So that's how we came up with the name in ring, and we just Kevin was in WWF, and at the height of wrestling, I was in WCW, and we have a lot of stories, and we have a lot of behind the scenes stuff that people always wonder about, and we're there, so we've seen it, so why not share our stories with people? And people want to know and want to hear, so we're here to tell it.
And Casey and I have that connective tissue with so many people, from his old partner Cliff Anderson getting me my start to somebody that was influential in both of our careers, in Blackjack Mulligan, and all the people that Terry was close with, like Kevin Sullivan. I had a great relationship with Kevin. There's connective tissue with all of us, and the Kevin Bacon 6 degrees of separation. Well, Casey and I are like 1 degree of separation, plus all of the projects and all the things that we've done together over the years when Casey was running his own shows. So being able to tell stories with your friend always kind of helps, and especially if I know the story as well, because if there's any details that Casey got power bombed and may have slipped out of his brain, I can be there to kind of fill in the gaps.
Yeah, I get kind of slide off, and he keeps the flow of the show going. We try to keep it 30 minutes. That way they can watch it on the way to work, or just a few minutes, and they get a couple good stories and this and that. And he keeps the flow going. He keeps me on track.
Any longer, and I need a nap. So there you go.
Yeah, and I've held you guys here for a while, but I got to ask one more question to you, Kevin. You mentioned that you were inadvertently responsible for the breakup of China and Triple H, and the jump from Triple H to Stephanie. I know you're probably going to end up back at the WWE one day, so you don't want to give too much details on this, but what was the backstage environment like during all that? Because I hear that just broke China.
Hunter really
Yeah.
owes you.
I know. I feel terrible. I really seriously do. And when I've told other guys in the business this story, they're like, "You bastard." I'm like, "I know," because a lot of people look to the kind of when Triple H and Stephanie were running things as like, a really rough time. Things are much better now, and obviously it's it's a whole different environment. And everything did work out between Triple H and Stephanie, and I guess they were meant to be together, and they've been married for all these years and have kids together. But it was the simple thing of my wife and I both being soap opera fans, and we're talking one night about the thing with the upcoming wedding with Stephanie and Test, and I was like, this is soap opera, something's got to happen. And so my wife throws out, she's like, "Isn't Triple H involved?" And I was like, "Yeah, well, what if Triple H somehow, swerved everybody and wound up marrying Stephanie?" And I was like, "Oh my God, that would be like classic soap opera. How do you get there?" And then I kind of like framed it out. And at the time, open submission, there wasn't a writing team. There were writers. There were people that were helping to put the shows together. But if you had an idea, you could submit it. So I go into the office and I write this, pretty lengthy email. Here's an idea that I have. And it was it's one of those things. And the first response I get was from Vince, and in all caps, all it said was, because I emailed everybody, Vince, JR, Kevin Dunn, Shane, blah, 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 this one, that one. And all Vince said was, "That's great shit," in all caps. And then Shane, who was in charge of .com at the time, he's on the same floor of the office that I am. He runs down, he leans into my office and, "Dude, that idea is crazy. I love it." And they wound up taking their own direction with it. But I had no idea that it was going to affect the real life relationship between China and Triple H. Obviously, when you put something out there like that, you think of these people as characters on a TV show, and you don't take into account what could be a real life human impact by it. So I did feel, kind of bad when all that, came about. It certainly wasn't the intent, but you forget, hey, listen, Triple H is Triple H, whether he's in the ring or he's, going and getting coffee, and China's China, even though her name was Joni Lauer, and they had a real life relationship as Joni and Paul, but it's just one of those things that happens. But yeah, Steve Corino was always one to point that out too, by the way. I do want that fact known, that he was part of that guilt trip. You did it. Yeah, I don't know. I did it.
Changed the course of wrestling.
It did.
There you go.
It did. And that's kind of one of our things with Casey, because, both of us have been there for so many big events. It's like the Forrest Gump theory. You know what I mean? Like, we were there and we weren't necessarily directly involved, like on camera, but we were directly behind the camera. We saw everything.
Yeah.
And we know the facts and the details and the dates and the names. So yeah, it's like Casey was there, for Hogan's turn. Casey was there for all those nitros in Florida. And I was there at the beginning of the NWO, but on the other side. And I'm like going, "Hey guys, this is really bad. They're putting something together here." And, WWF is going down and WCW is going up, and everything wound up changing. But what a perspective that we both had. So we're able to share those stories on the podcast each and every week.
Yeah, I was really close friends with Kevin Sullivan the whole time. I knew him since I was 15 years old. So, I have millions of stories from him and Blackjack. And talk about ribs. He said the best ribber in the business was Harley Race. I was talking to Harley one time. He's like, "Don't believe what Jack says. They're much worse."
They're much worse. That's just it.
Yeah.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, Harley
where
would shoot
are you
everyone
guys
with
living
their
now,
350.
by the way? Do you guys
I'm
both
down
live
in
the
Florida.
Casey's where it's warm, and I'm much closer to you. I'm in Pennsylvania. I'm way up north in the freezing cold.
Do you have the drones where you are?
That's to the east in New Jersey. I'm
Okay.
Thankfully I'm drone free here in PA.
All right. I hope it stays that way. I'll let you guys close this off with whatever you want to tell the fans.
I'm thankful to have Casey Thompson in my life. He's a wonderful guy, and being able to tell his story through his journey you know, as kind of the backdrop of all the names and everything that we're, you know, kind of basing the show on. I'm just fascinated learning more and more about Casey. He's a great, great father, you know, a great guy. And it's just been wonderful to be able to bring his story out as well.